Welcome to the live stream, ladies and gentlemen. It is I, your host today, Bumpy McSquigums, joined by Cupogoodness and a tiny disaster. We're diving into building your team, kind of a follow-through or just a kind of a sequel to something we mentioned in one of our previous chats where we were talking about kind of figure out what you can and cannot do, or what you can and cannot do well, and try to budget accordingly and find people to fill those slots. Now, how and where do you find those people, and what do you need to look for? Well, that's what we're going to try to talk about today. So how are you two doing on this day?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Yeah, I'm doing well. How are you, Bumpy?
Oh, neck problem, but I'm okay. I'll survive. I have a heating pad on my neck.
Wish I could get my thumbs on you. You know what I mean? Get in there.
Well, my wife already attacked me today. So
oh, good. Good.
It did help a bit.
Last it is one of the... Does seem like one of the duties of the significant other is to just kind of
get in there with the reflexology and massage.
Oh, that's awesome. So that's actually kind of her bag. Okay, cool.
Indubitably. All right. So where would you like to start today, or is there any other preamble you wanted? Hi, Missy. Welcome to the chat and the stream and all the stuffs. Is there any other preamble you wanted to mention, or better tie-in or follow through? More specifically,
let's open this up to the three of us and just say how do you two see this conversation going today? Do you want me to just run through these notes? I put some notes together on our shared board here that we have between the three of us. I can go through those. Do you have any particular, when you hear the subject, when you hear the idea of hiring others for your project, for your independent project, whether it's games or whatever, you really don't have to think. You don't have to confine yourself to game. What do you guys think about? Like, what comes to mind? Any questions that come up? We could maybe start there, or we can just run down the list if you guys don't feel there's anything off the top of your head that's inspiring yet, and we need to get into the meat a little bit first.
What questions? The first thing that pops into my head. I have a bit of experience with this on the book side of things, but zero on games. It's just having an existing network. Obviously, some social media spiel in here because you can do a lot of your networking there, but knowing, like, being aware of who people are at your level in the industry and kind of already having a sense of who's doing what to some level. Obviously, you cannot know everybody or even close to everybody. It makes it a lot easier not to be overwhelmed when you get to that point on your own, because you aren't just jumping in blind of like, okay, who programs, who does art, what art style do I want? So just doing some networking as it's something you're going to be thinking about in the future can help a lot once you get there.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Networking really important. And another thing that I didn't note here on my notes, but I think is important to mention based off what you just said, is and this is kind of pre-pandemic, but it hopefully can be something that starts up soon, or restarts up soon, is depending on where you're at, I'm not necessarily in a great space. And I don't know if you two are either, but in some spaces like, big cities, or at least like, near metropolize, there are like local meetups, places where you can get together with other like-minded individuals, developers, etc. Usually they meet at pubs, or you don't have to drink though. There's no pressure on that kind of stuff. It's just sort of that's their meeting grounds, or they'll meet at restaurants or coffee shops, etc. Finding like a place to get together and exchange information, network, as you say, tiny disaster, and put themselves on the map, so to speak, to each other, so that in the future, if someone needs help identifying, a hire that they need to get possibly either through them, like hiring someone local is potentially a possibility, or maybe someone that you're going to hire has worked with someone else that that you didn't work with before. That can be like pretty big advantages to have insight on your hire. Obviously, we're not trying to stalk anybody here, but we need to like get assurances essentially, because resumes and here's what I've done, it's certainly reliable to some extent based on what you can see as much as the projects and the stuff that you can actually see is commercial out there. Say if they worked on Steam releases, you can actually do a little research on how much review, what are the positive reviews, and if it wasn't really great, was it on their specialty that caused many of that, or did they do their job really well and nothing was going on? So, but yeah, sorry, local.
What you said about networking and amplifying that is really important as well. Of like, even just take Twitter networking. So you make a few friends, you make connections, you're commenting on other people's work, and then you're looking for someone to score your game. Tweeting that you're looking and then having people who have already connected with you use their networks and recommend people will amplify what you can do on your own so much that it really, you're not expected to know everybody, but at the end of the day, it's not a huge industry. People know people.
Yeah, no, well, and people will get hired more based on their notoriety, their interconnection with others. That makes a huge difference. When we talk about getting hired in the first place, and we going back to that talk, that's a big thing. There is not being on an island, not staying out of social situations. Even now, especially now virtually. And I agree with what you said about how it's more than just being local in your area. You should actually find your group of people online that you think, okay, these are people that are willing to give as much as they get, because this is really the hard part of networking, is that the LinkedIn situation. I can think back to some other things that are a lot more just not very productive and kind of just lame, and the networking feels wholly stale and not authentic. So you really want to find
using the word networking at all. Like, it has such a bad rap after anyone who has tried to done any sort of education in any industry where they tell you have to network, and it just feels like this terrible thing. You want to make friends and connections and acquaintances.
Right.
It's not stiff board meeting.
It really should be your personal selfish benefit should really be secondary to all the things that you just mentioned. Tiny disaster. Yes, it's nice to network and get some payoff from that in a business sense. Absolutely, and it happens all the time. But if that's your end goal and it's showing, a lot of people are not going to want, like a lot of reasonable, good business partners are not going to want to network or entertain conversations with you. So that's something to keep in mind. But it's one of those things that you just get your Rolodex going in terms of your connections. Rolodex is totally aging me, but anyway, like you get your contact list, built out in terms of your connections, who who you spend time discussing, talking shop with, right? Like finding those times to get together, whether it's an email list, a forum, some kind of social media gathering group, subreddit, etc. So anything that you can find where you can have some consistent conversation and identify each other a little bit and be able to kind of, a lot of times it's just show and tell, right? A lot of times it's just groups that like to show off individually what they're working on. And then the trade is, I'm going to now enjoy looking at what you're going to show off to me, what you're working on, and it kind of builds from there. So you establish a lot of stuff there by just networking it out. People will post on, of course, their Twitter and accounts and stuff like that here's what I do. Here's a lot of people will have websites or bylines or ways that you can track, their work and see what they've done in case you want to be the one to initiate a hire, as opposed to do a hiring round and announcing that. We'll get to that in my notes in a little bit here, but yeah, that's a great way to kind of start to kick off the conversation. I think, TD, it's really about like how, if either side of, if you're hiring or if you want to get hired, you need to get kind of involved with the individuals in your space, and don't just go for the ones that you think can help you, as you pointed out, TD. Like, don't just don't just be seeking out the ones that can help you. A lot of people, like where I'm at, if you look at my job history over the last 11 years, you might not think I would be where I am now from where I started. So that's to say, like, you shouldn't look at anybody as, don't look down on anybody. Don't think anybody has any lesser value than you just because they're not on the same, maybe, plane as you in terms of the job you do, maybe the money you earn if you guys get to talking about that and you go, never look down on that kind of thing, because people rise up, people keep pushing through. A lot of these people that aren't getting paid that much are actually some of the hardest working people, and they're looking to break through to higher levels, and a lot of them will. And so never tarnish a relationship unless the person's a total jerk. You know what I mean? Unless the person is just not someone that's workable for you. Make sure that you keep good relationships with pretty much everybody. Y'all know me pretty well at this point. I think the two of you. And there's only a couple people that I'm like, screw that person. I'm never going to work with that person and stuff like that.
We're going to name and shame them right here now. No, I'm kidding.
No, my point is that like you have to do something pretty much to like really bother me. And there's things that people have done to me personally that I still flush down the toilet for business matters. You know what I mean? Like that, like it personally wounded me hardcore. Like, but we had to move forward. The business partner that I was working with and them wanted to work together, so we moved forward on it. That kind of thing. So, I mean, you got to make choices and that kind of thing. We're getting off a little bit on a tangent here, but my point is that getting into this hiring business is and networking and all that kind of stuff. It's not something that is a quick thing to do. It's not something that you should look to do in like a quick and easy way or like a quick fix or a shortcut kind of thing. It's something that you invest in, and it's something that you put time into and effort into to get things back from as well. And if you don't get things back, you're not bitter about it, right? Like you should still be contributing to your group, your whatever it is that you're trying to do in terms of networking. And eventually you'll see things come back to you. It might not come back right away, but that's okay. Not every single person or every single connection you're going to make is going to be, something that's going to turn into a business deal for you. And that's great. You shouldn't think about things that way anyway. So anyway, we're running on that a little bit. Let's move off. Bumpy or Tiny Disaster, is there anything else that comes to mind as we get started here that you want to touch on, or should we just go in from define and detail what exactly you're looking for in a hire, which is my first note for the talk.
Jump in.
Yep, I say this whole situation is
He's trying desperately to hydrate.
It's something that I am trying to just to figure out in general, because it's one of those things. It's like I know people hire people all the time, but like where do they do that? And I think that would be something that, since I know nothing about, it'd be a good thing that maybe other people don't know anything about. So I'm ready to dive in and learn.
Right. I feel like generally speaking, you have a couple of like thoughts in 2022, actually. I was about to say 2021. 2022 in terms of like where you would find people to hire. One is probably social media. Is probably going through Twitter in particular, although there are other, depending on what they do, there might be other social media platforms you might want to check them out on, like maybe they're checking out their Instagram and or TikTok if they do certain, animations, art, etc. That could be a better platform. But generally speaking, Twitter seems to be the kind of the marriage.
Social media.
It's like business social is the perfect way to put it, because it's like a marriage of like LinkedIn and a social media platform that everybody can stand. And then that's like kind of together. So people, are willing to broadcast themselves and what they do there, i.e. us, like we do that on there as well. But also it's like not just about our work. It's our personal stuff as well. And so I think you find a lot of people on Twitter like to say, this is where I think I can post my stuff. I can announce what I do. And I think there's enough. I think that the big thing is that everybody kind of believes that there's enough worthy people, valuable people on Twitter to do this process, right? So we all commit to it, because I don't think people feel like that about other social media platforms like Facebook or LinkedIn at this point. Not that much, at least not in our industry. I get the feeling that it feels much more, confirming. Like it's like I'm going to be able to actually find somebody, whether somebody I want to hire me or vice versa on Twitter. So that's one thing.
I do think. Because you talking before about posting, like as a freelancer, posting what you do. If you are a studio already, and I know this is in your notes, but the difference of like, if you're looking to hire a full-time employee, they will kind of come to you. It just takes a couple tweets on Twitter if you have any following at all. I know I've seen some pop up on Twitter that then show up in all my game dev Slacks and Discords and that kind of thing of like, Twitter is just enough to put it out in the world. And then if you're hiring a full-time position, it's a little easier just to pick from all of the people who are interested in working for you versus finding a freelancer is a bit more of a dance, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And then, so the other thing you can do is like a job posting. So it's like where you actually, announce, hey, we're hiring, an animator, we're hiring a programmer, etc. And you can do that on your social medias, of course. You get it posted. You usually have like a post on your website. You may consider posting this even in places like, even like Steam and stuff, like, because there's, a lot of gamers are definitely employed industry workers as well. So it's just a thing that do you want to find the exact right person, or do you want hopefully a slew of candidates to come to you and submit, and then that you can parse out, and then like, what's your process on that? And sometimes it depends on the person you're hiring or the role you're hiring for, I guess is what I mean. So it depends on the role. But I've seen, like, one of the things that I've seen was we were talking about like our networking groups, right? And I have an email group that I'm a part of that's a bunch of indie devs, and they will often post job listings on the site and say, hey, and also the tweets, and say, hey, if you guys could amplify this by retweeting, or if anyone's interested that please pass it along and such. So that's a great way to get the word out beyond just your own social media, is asking for other devs in your network, if that's something that is cool and is allowed, kind of to do for that kind of self promotion. And a lot of times the devs will appreciate it because maybe one of them would apply for it if they're depending on the group and all that kind of stuff. If they're an established dev, they're not going to apply for it, obviously. But if they're like a hobbyist dev that is looking for extra work, then they might be the right fit for you. So job listings is another way you could go about it. I think, yeah, again, it depends on the role and what you're looking for. There might be something that you're thinking, I want to really find the candidates myself. If it's like a certain art style, I want to go out and find, maybe 1, 2, 3 candidates total, and I don't want like a slew of submissions and candidates for me to consider, then yeah, you don't want to necessarily go with a job posting. But if you're saying we're looking for like a marketing manager or a social media manager or something that's social media, I'm not sure why I'm saying manager wrong. Manager. If you need someone like that, where it's a little more nebulous what they do and it's hard to define or see results right in front of your face, like art, that's something that you might say, I want to see like a pretty wide swath of resumes here. I want to see like a lot of CVs here and go through these and see the experience that they have. And I want to in my own, without them knowing, I want to basically get a little competition going and seeing if I can find the best, most experienced person out of this, and if they're the right fit for me in terms of budget, and if they're the right fit, hopefully in terms of their kind of their vibe with the company, and if they fit with the company's vibe as well. So yeah, let's get into it. So define in detail what exactly you're looking for in your hire. We talked about like the ways you could do that. We'll get into that a little bit more. But what budget are you working with for this hire is really important to define. As we were saying before we started the stream, Bumpy jokingly kind of pointed out, like, budget, what does this mean to an indie developer? And I totally understand what you mean. He's joking to some extent, but there's truth in the joke, which the truth is, if you're a solo developer, you might not even be keeping track of your own finances based on what they cost, your cost of your own kind of development time.
Yeah, essentially, a lot of solo developers, they do all the development, all the stuff, and they don't pay themselves. So essentially, it's just time that they're putting into the company without getting compensated.
Right. But likely they still have to pay bills, right? And so there's still something that it makes sense to, even if you're a solo dev, we encourage strongly that you budget yourself if possible. If you're willing to do that. There may be a thing where it's ignorance is bliss, where you don't want to think about it and you just want to push forward on it. And as long as you feel strongly about it and you know that you're can take care of your bills, you know what I mean? Like, that's the big thing, right? Like, I just don't want to encourage anybody to push forward where they don't have the financial means to do so, and then look back and go, oh my gosh, what have I done? So it can very easily happen, and especially if you're going for a commercial release, some of the money that you might have to invest, you might not realize as you're in your early process of your development. So something to keep in mind. But yes, it was an interesting thing that you mentioned there at the beginning, or right before we started, Bumpy, and that made me think a little bit. I'm like, yeah, if you're a hobbyist dev, if you're a solo dev that just works, your investment is your time, not your money at this point. It's a little different, to think, oh, I have a budget. I'm going to actually take money from probably my personal account and set it aside for my game, for my game development and for and for potentially other people helping me on it. And as you point out, a lot of people don't pay themselves. Some people do, as solo devs or small teams and stuff, and that's what you're supposed to do, generally speaking, if you can.
And a perfect
take it from your own bank account to put it back in your own bank account. It seems a little pointless.
Again, the idea is it should be a separate bank account for your company that's coming back to your personal account. So at some point that money did separate itself. And you've set aside a budget for it. And if you think about it, it's just I mean, this may be a weird perspective thing, but the way that Chris Park from Arcen always told me is don't think of losses as losses. The money's gone. It's gone. Don't think about it anymore. Like, it's not there anymore to be worried about. So you got to move forward with what you have, like, and that kind of thing. I always thought that was an interesting way to think about it and stuff, because he's right in terms of mentality. Like, you need to not worry about something that you don't have. You can't, it's not going to do anything for you and stuff. So, but anyway, so what budget are you working with for this hire? If you're working with like the budget that you would really want to for it, then you might be able to go out and find that high level professional, or perhaps even star of their corner of their industry, right? Like some very well-known composer, let's say. We're really proud of ours, Jonathan Gear at Vertigo Gaming Inc. I think he's pretty well known at this point and has a very unique style. That's someone that would, you would need a budget for. You wouldn't just be like, oh, I'm gonna, hope to haggle and I only have a few thousand here. You're not going to get, well established folks like that. They have a baseline. They know their value. They've consistently gotten work, and so they stick by that as well. And that's what professionals, will do and probably should do. As far as I'm concerned, you should. In a world that tries to undervalue every single person at every single turn, it feels like, getting a chance to actually earn your value is rare. And so that's not something that I ever hold against those folks, but it's just something to keep in mind. If you don't have a budget for that level of people, you're not going to get that level of professional or veteranship or whatever you want to call it, or talent even. But you don't know that necessarily, because there are up and coming folks, and it's not just diamonds in the rough, so to speak, but it's just people that haven't had the opportunity necessarily to show off their talent yet. And so that's maybe where you go to next if your budget is a little bit on the lower side, or something that you feel is reasonable, but it's not going to get you, the 5-star, oh, everybody's heard of this person.
Figure out what is reasonable, because the thought that keeps coming up in my head of like, oh, we should talk about people who try to pay you with exposure. Mm-hmm. So how do you figure out what is reasonable?
That's a great question. It's a really, really good question. And it starts with having that conversation with the person and getting their rates. And hopefully this is like a meme I post every year, I feel like, is the Wild Wild West showdown, where it's like a freelancer and a business. And it's like, oh, what are your rates? And it's like, well, what's your budget? And they just don't say, they don't identify a number. No one wants to identify a number.
It's a starting point, yeah. Gotcha.
But it really, to me, falls on the person that is being hired to stand by a value for themselves. And
you can call on either side. A lot of it comes from companies trying to pay you as little as they can get away with. If the companies took the moral side, it'd be way less of an issue.
I 100% agree, and it's a sad state that a lot of people undervalue themselves personally because of this and do not step to the plate. But you have to at least be able to put a number out. Because if you can't put a number out that you're going to be satisfied with me paying you, and you're just going to have me kind of figure it out, I'm going to probably find as a business, as a company person, I'm going to probably find the lowest acceptable number that's reasonable to me. I think that's how most people will work in that regard. Am I a terrible person? Maybe, I don't know. But my point is that if you tell me what you want, I can consider that. You know what I mean? Like, I can actually say, okay, is that reasonable? Yeah, that's reasonable. Okay, I didn't necessarily think I was going to be paying that much. And then you can maybe have a negotiation. They can give you some value, some points of value. I'm going to be doing this on the other side, by the way, with some platform holders pretty soon, explaining to them why we're valuable, like why that makes sense to us. Sometimes you shouldn't have to defend that, but in business, sometimes it makes sense to know what those little points are. So in case they come back and say, why do you think you deserve this much, or why should I have to pay you this much? You have very specific reasons and not just vagaries. You know what I mean? Like, to give them back. But anyway, it's very debatable. My point is that if you as a hiree can say, this project I would want X amount per month, that gives them a ballpark. And if you're worried about losing the job, think about if you would be happy working for that job at half of what you offer. Would you be happy in that case? Or would you be kind of mad because you're working for half of what you actually want? Or at least if you offered whatever you offered, you were like, I'll take, a little bit less, but I don't want half of this, that kind of thing. And then the person offers you half and you take it. And then you have kind of a weird relationship there. You got to watch that. You have to be willing to walk away in certain cases. And I think that's a thing too. You have to be willing to put the number out there. And then if they balk at it, understand that company's probably not a good company or not for you. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, if they're not willing to pay me the amount that I think I deserve to pay, and that maybe you've confirmed that your rate is reasonable with others, whether through the networking process or just through other experience and freelance hires and stuff and such, you've run into a penny pinching company. You know what I mean? Like, if you want to work with them, you just know what you're getting into with them, because they're identifying themselves right off the bat. If you can give them a reasonable number that you feel like, it's a little nervous for me asking this because I'm putting it out there. I have to put a figure out there, and I don't know if they're going to say yes or no, and it's really nerve-wracking. But by doing that, you exercise some power and some agency in the negotiation in the situation that you otherwise wouldn't do. You wouldn't be able to do, I guess, if you didn't put that out there.
Just to throw it the other way, that doesn't necessarily mean every company's that way, because again, we're talking about budgeting. So, and maybe you're the perfect person they're looking for, but they can't afford you. So, again, in theory, you hope people are honest, but they rarely are. So maybe they come back and say, "Look, I'd love to have you," and I think they should approach it this way: "I'd love to have you. I feel like you're the perfect fit, but we can't meet that budgetary thing. This is the most we can do," and like, people should actually legit be able to say that and not be like, "Oh, we totally tricked him. We could have paid him triple that, and we didn't." But like,
and that's why
it's
I know one
tough
state recently, and there's a push for more of it. Putting salary ranges in job postings is starting to become more of a legal requirement of, like, you don't have to say exactly what it is, but like, depending on your experience and what you bring to the table, this is what we have budgeted for it. Be upfront.
And that's a great point. And I think that should be included in the job listing or whatever we're talking about before. If you're willing to put that number out there as the hirer, that is a smart, welcoming move to the people that are applying for it, because then they at least have that range to work with and know that they can ask for it. That also allows people who are not within that range to say, it's
not waste their time, not waste your time.
Right, exactly. That's a really important thing. You have to understand that when you go through this process, it is far from perfect. It's going to be complicated, most likely. And as we'll get to in a little bit with one of the last notes I mentioned, even if you get all the way through to the hire, to like the process of hiring them, you might find out 1, 2, 3 months down the road that it's not working out. So it's just, there's a lot of, it's an imperfect situation, and you got to just kind of stay on top of it and understand the kind of ebb and flow with it. Bumpy, you were going to say something?
Oh, I just want to point out that Missy said earlier, when you were talking about what Chris Park told you, when stuff is gone, there's nothing you can do. There's no point in worrying about it. You need to move forward with what you do have. She says that that is good advice just for personal budgeting. Don't think back on what you've already spent, as you can't change it. So it's very true.
Yeah, and usually, most of the time, losses aren't losses. They were spent on something. Yeah. You know what I mean? They earned something.
Maybe not the best choice, but lesson learned, right?
Right. That's the thing. Even a loss is a lesson, so that you can learn from. So you take it in a positive light and you move forward with it, because if you get beaten down by those negative, kind of happenings and hits, then you're not going to last very long. I wouldn't last as long if I got beaten down by them, I guess. So let me just try to get back on track. Someone proven, or we talked about that, or does the position afford you the option to give someone less experience an opportunity? So, and that can depend on the job role. Like, I feel like if you have a specific art style you want to go for, or like you want a very specific type of music, then you may have to pay out a little bit for that and get that exactly right. But say like you want like a social media manager or a community manager, I mean, there are so many people looking for an opportunity to do that out there, and so many people that could do that really well. And so putting that out there and giving them the opportunity to do that, and saying, I don't need to get a Victoria Tran, who's the Among Us and before Kit Fox, like community manager. Like I don't need like a Victoria Tran level social media manager. I need someone that's willing to start at what we would call not entry level, but like at like a a reasonable lower on the totem pay status, and work up with us. And if they're building their community, our community up because of their work with our games, and our company's getting bigger, then their salary can get bigger as well. That's something that I see a lot of times, and that I like working together with people on. But that's a lot of times you'll miss out on a lot of people in that regard. Like Indie Brothers has not had we had a chance to hire certain people that when it came down to it, they needed full time. They needed certain securities that we just could not offer them, other things like that, and we didn't get to work together, and it sucks because they were really they could have, who knows what they could have contributed to Indie Brothers in addition to what we already have. But that's the way it goes sometimes. You just, like you said, you're not gonna resent anybody that doesn't want to work within the structure that you have to offer, essentially. And for the most part, we're trying to avoid those conversations, as TD's pointed out. We're not trying to waste our time with theirs. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So yeah, is it a part-time contractor position, a full-time employee position? What that means to you in terms of your tax filing and just running your business, it's kind of good to have those kind of pre-planning kind of things in mind before you start going on your hiring search. Yeah, or going out with a posting. Building up that first point, what do you need from them? Are they a specialist? Do you need a jack of all trades like Cup over here? Like that's something that I've done. A jack of all trades is how I bounced around the industry the last 15 years. Just whatever you need me to do, and I found my way through it that way. And obviously I've developed some specialties and some, focuses out of that over the last 15 years. But it was my versatility that allowed me to work and stay in the industry for sure. Because if I just said, no, I am this and only this, and I will be nothing else, then I would
I could ask you a million questions about that on a different chat, but we're not.
For sure.
We're crunched for time. Because that's what I want to do, is literally everything.
Yeah, jack of all trades is to me one of the most fun roles to play in any situation, but especially in the industry or for work, because I get tired of doing the same exact thing over and over across the years of time, and I need to kind of diversify, mix it up a little bit. And it doesn't mean that I've stopped doing any of the things that I've done consistently over certain years of time, but if I don't have little other things, kind of for fun or for work and stuff that are different, then I can get quite dull in the head. So jack of all trades. Do you want to hire someone to play devil's advocate? Good idea. Other perspectives? Good idea. Consumers, community, publishers, etc. As in they're willing to think about, or they naturally do this, ask questions that are tough for the developer to think about, or challenge questions, or these are difficult things to even self-analyze sometimes. But by having somebody on the team that does that, you're that much better of a company because you're taking in those considerations and actually working them out, as opposed to just being like, no, they don't exist. So to have someone to actually, not talk back to you, but offer, again, other perspectives and say, well, what about this? Or if we did that, is that a good idea? Because I think about, the community, how they would react, that kind of stuff. It's good to have those kind of folks. It's just for you to make sure that you're not too narrow with your notions, basically. And we'll get into some of the diversity talk a little bit here as well.
And Missy,
and we're doing that. Yeah.
Missy said, and I agree with this, is something that I've always been a big proponent of, even from a content creation standpoint, but that's not really what we're talking about here. But growing with the company sounds good, really, really good, because it helps motivate you to do the best that you can. And the company will, of course, do the best they can and keep their word. So, kind of that mutually beneficial relationship. And then, if we succeed, you succeed, the, rising tide, all ships and all that.
Yeah, I think the key is to get some skin in the game early and get that contractually sealed off, so that, companies are great and stuff like that. But, we talked about it before, you really shouldn't trust them unless it's in the contract, the actual word and stuff. If you're just getting paid a certain amount, and they say, oh, well, we'll give you a raise later. If that's not contractually kind of like built in, you may want to say, hey, actually, I would like a percentage of revenue for the company, like 4%, 5%, 2%, whatever you think makes sense for what your job is. 10% if you're a bigger role for the company, maybe even 20. But the point of that, what I'm saying there is that they can't hide from the fact that they're making a lot of money. They can't hide that from you if you have a percentage of revenue, right?
Essentially, instead of making X number an hour, if they do have an incredible year, and they make 5 times what they normally make, you're still getting the same amount. Here, you're growing with the company.
Ideally, you'd be able to get a nice, reasonable, possibly on the low side, but reasonable base salary that you could add the revenue share to. And if it's going really well, then you see that benefit, you know what I mean, on top of your base salary. So even if your base salary never changed, if your company was killing it all the time, then you were killing it as well, essentially.
There's probably a conversation to have there as well about devs very much just getting into it as beginners, and like they can't afford anybody, so looking for partners instead of employees.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's really. Yeah. I think that's a really good point. If you don't have this budget like that we're talking about, then it may be time to try to look for collaborative efforts, and you may have to sacrifice some of your agency in the process of that, because you're not going to be the boss or the leader or the the founder of the group. But that's the way it goes when you don't have any money to back and hire.
Especially in those kind of circles, you find everyone wants to find collaborators to make their dream game and not to work on someone else's dream game. So if you do manage to find someone on, you're going to have to be willing to share the vision of the game. It can't just be, I am the boss now.
Yeah, mostly you're looking for people who are willing to work autonomously, that focus on their specialties and say, you do your thing, I'll do my thing, and let's get together. And obviously making sure before you say that you have like a collective, thought in mind when you're going forward with whatever your project is. If someone is strong-arming that situation, you just decide if you want to deal with it or not, because you're not getting paid anything, they're not getting paid anything. When you're doing free projects or projects that you're not getting paid for, you can walk away from them at any time. There's no chains binding you at that point. So remember that. Never, if you're doing like some free collaborative stuff, it's up to you based on who you're working with, if you think that they're reasonable or not. And but it's a great way. It's a great way to get started, to build up, to maybe get a few smaller commercial releases out even potentially without spending a ton of money. If you can collaborate with other people that are also willing to do kind of commit to the same thing, and then suddenly maybe you do have a budget for game 3, game 4, something like that down the line. Something to keep in mind. That's great. That's a great point, TD, because it does exclude, if we talk about people just with monetary budgets that can hire people on this talk. So I appreciate that.
One of the examples I think that kind of falls in this, I don't know exactly if it's buying into the company or becoming a collaborator, but just from a vision standpoint, William Cheer, right? And Manifold Garden. He had a vision for the game for a very long time, and then he was very hesitant or reticent to bring other people on because he wanted, this was his baby. He wanted full control, but then he started letting people do different things, and they kind of took the ball and ran with it, and then they're like, well, why don't we try this idea? He's like, I don't know. And then people got to play test it, and they're like, man, they really loved that. That was a great idea. And then he started kind of opening up the reins, so to speak, to let other people, kind of build up his work, his baby, as it were. So
it's the confidence he has that he's still in control of the project overall, can make decisions and say, no, I don't want to include this in the game if he ultimately and such. And that can be hard.
Yeah, he said that was one of the hardest things he had to do, but he was better for it. And that kind of plays into the next point too.
Right, but people understand that a lot of the stuff. I mean, if you're a good veteran programmer or artist or any kind of anything, that a lot of the work that you do might get scrapped. It might not actually ever make it to the final cut of the game or the commercial release, and that's not something that should bother you. That's part of the process. So hopefully that a lot of people feel that way when they are creating something that may ultimately not go. You still tried something. It was an experiment. It's really cool that you tried it. It didn't quite work with like maybe the this or that with the game, and that was why it was cut. But it's It's great experience, and as you pointed out, Bumpy, the developer did use a lot of those ideas. You know what I mean? He did go for a lot of that stuff. So it's like, it's a thing, again, don't be afraid of failure, because you're going to find successes within that process of trying, to keep pushing out some of the ideas you have.
Well, and like I said, that whole
right.
thing kind of plays into the next point too. It's, he got other people involved that had a different point of view, different perspective, and were willing to challenge him on those things. And, he gave it a shot and people loved it. So
yeah, it's like, what's worse, like being by yourself or being surrounded by yes people? I don't know. But the one thing that I think that as we're talking about now is, like, if you're of the mind that the more diverse perspectives and backgrounds you have on your team, the better, which we would encourage you to be. There's extra work to be done due to some of these inherent biases that have been built up and long established through, though people of color, women, LGBTQ, and other marginalized groups are getting more advocacy nowadays than basically any time in the past. It's still a huge uphill battle. And it's clear in our industry and other industries, like the current class action lawsuit the NFL is facing is a great example, that it's far from ideal, especially when you consider that at least I wouldn't say half, but maybe around half of business owners, managers, people with power, et cetera, continue to want to push the status quo trend that we've seen now forever and ever, and resist evolving to more of a diverse situation whenever they can. It's not just that they are trying to not do it. It's that they're fully resisting it 100%, saying there's no chance that we're going to be hiring anyone but people that, we have always hired, that kind of thing.
Conscious of people hire people who feel similar to them. So if it's the top is all looks one way, I can relate to this person, I'm going to hire this person. It's not necessarily a block people know is in their heads.
I think it's both, because I think
I agree.
The built-in thing has been forever and ever, TD. That has been how it's always been. What you just said has always been. It feels like, but recently now, these companies are so mad about diversity efforts that they're putting their foot, basically, like they're digging in on this hill that they're going to die on, and say, no, we are going to, basically row in the opposite direction of that, and there are sort of laws and acts and other things going into play here now that will eventually affect these people, and there's going to be a lot of grumbling from them over the next several, decades, most certainly. But this thing isn't going to change overnight. It's not something that's going to change in our lifetime necessarily to the full extent that we want it to. We're going to be fighting this battle for, a long, long, long time, and it needs to be fought continuously. And one of the ways you do that is you have to kind of do the work. And what I mean by do the work is that you may have to stretch a little bit farther than you anticipated to find the right person for your company that isn't that person you already know, that isn't that person that's like you, that is that person that looks like you, that that grew up in the same place as you, that spends time in the same circles as you. That takes extra effort, and you have to do that kind of work if you want to have a diversified team. Another thing that I think people forget about, that's pointed out all the time, it really doesn't matter how diversified your team is if all the people up top are white men. It's you have to diversify, not just at the core bottom or worker area of your company. You have to have people at the top that are different, and you have to be willing to, if you're the owner of your company, you have to be willing to share that load and sort of mix it up and have other partners in there, I think. And that can make a really dramatic difference for you. But anyway, I'm not trying to get on a soapbox here or anything with that. It's just something that I've really paid attention to recently, because there's a huge resistance to it because of how it's basically, I think, as good as it's ever been, while still being a huge struggle for marginalized groups, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I feel like at how far the industry's come in 10, 15 years, even just indie games specifically, of how much the industry has grown by just starting to make games that aren't necessarily dude games.
Yeah.
It's massive, and it's going to continue to grow that way, which is awesome.
Right. And whether they're good or bad, it's just good that they exist. It's a good, whether the games turn out 10 out of 10s or they weren't as good as we thought they were, every other game that has had the non-marginalized people on it have been good or bad, have had the chances to do all these things and stuff. So let's even the playing field. And I think it really does start with having more people at the top that are not the status quo, what we're used to seeing and such. So And that falls on me too. It's something that I have to personally work with on myself and my companies I work for as well. It's not just something that like I'm like, oh, I've got it completely figured out. There's no way I can say that. It's not there yet at all, and so there's work to be done, and it's always something that you got to kind of keep in mind. It's definitely a thing to consider. I know people are probably tired of talking about it to some extent, and I think that's true across a lot of different aspects of life. A lot of people are just like exhausted of certain conversations that we've had so ad nauseum over the last few years. But that can't don't let that affect you in a way that says, okay, I'm not going to be able to do the extra work here. I'm not going to be able to understand the playing field and how things work. And instead of just going for like the usual hires and such, so to speak. So be willing to challenge yourself on that front is all I have to say. Especially if you haven't felt like you've challenged yourself in the past, or you come from a background that's already challenging. So it's something to keep in mind. We could go on and on it. And
we had another talk that covered this quite a bit. So if anyone's interested, we can like leave a link in the description of this video or something. But
that's a good point.
Kind of went pretty far into depth on this.
Sure, and the thing that's more, I don't want to say more pertinent because it seems like I'm minimizing the whole situation, but more in line with what we're talking about today is that these people with the different backgrounds, they're going to have different ideas and concepts because of where they came from, and a different point of view that is, again, it's going to challenge you with things that you never thought about before, coming at it from just a different angle. Like, oh, I never thought. So it's just going to, again, it's going to give you other options, other avenues you can go down, and just kind of open up things a bit more for you, as opposed to having.
Yeah, it's going to give your game elements that studios who aren't doing that don't have, that are going to appeal to audiences.
It really just starts with admitting that you're a singular, fallible perspective, and being willing to admit that, as opposed to just being like, I know exactly what everything's. It's like it's almost like part of my generation anyway, myself included, had to shake that off and say, I don't know, as a youth, you know what I mean, and just as an immature thought. It's like, I don't know. Not everybody's going to find this movie I find funny. You know what I mean? Like, it's just simple as that. Or when you watch something that you're like, this is terrible. You're like, wait, it's just not for me. It's just not for me. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily, maybe it is terrible, but like, a lot of things that I've said are terrible in the past are simply just not for me.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm trying to identify now.
We've made it.
Go ahead,
we got our first chatbot spammer on YouTube. So go us.
All right, we're really famous now.
Yes.
But yeah, where to find these candidates? We talked a little bit about this through our conversations. You could post a job listing and see what comes of it. You could go on your own search via general and targeted social media platforms, groups, forums, etc. There are probably sites out there. There are probably agencies out there that specialize in, or managers, talent agencies, etc., that specialize in composers or artists, things of that sort. We certainly see that with like Twitch streamers and YouTubers. They are often they have representatives or agents or talent groups or management of some sort. So you can find if you want to find maybe something that's a little bit more established, or that you can kind of say, okay, going to their website, I can go to this website, I can see that they have talented, veteran, kind of specialists for what I'm looking for. That can be a great way to find what you're looking for if it's the right kind of job or role that we're talking about. If you reach out to specific individuals, make sure you're going about it in the right way. So this is just a little like best practices in terms of reaching out to people when you want to potentially hire or interview them for a hire, etc. So what's the right way? It can be different depending, looking at someone's profile, say like their Twitter profile, and what they have available. Is their email address listed? Is there like a website?
Sorry, real quick. If you are in the video game industry and a professional of any type, whether you're a content creator or anyone else, and you do want people to be able to get in contact with you, always on social media, whether it's YouTube, Twitch, or on Twitter, have your email address available and visible. Do it. So important. All right.
Yeah, and the only pushback there is if you're so dang popular that it's just getting spammed to heck all the time. And so some people I've seen do contact forms, which again, nobody likes, but you will still have people that want to work with you go through the contact form. So there's also like the idea of here's my link tree or here's my website, and if someone really wants to work with you, they will click through and do that. So if you're getting kind of too much on posting I always say don't post the email address exactly as it is, but throw in like bracket at instead of the actual at, so that they have to change it. You're just going to eliminate a lot of bot spams there probably, and like and then you just deal with the people that you're like, I'm not interested. It happens. 8 out of 10 things are going to happen that way anyway. But you're going to get more offers than you ever would before, or more conversations started than you ever would before, because people will look for your contact information for maybe like 5 to 15 seconds, and if they can't find it, they're like, so it's just.
I've heard that a lot from PR folk that are looking for content creators.
Oh,
like if I can't find your email address quickly, I'm just going to pass you. So yeah, it's super important.
It was originally a power move by huge channels. They were like, I am too huge. You cannot contact me. And we were like, okay. But then eventually, like, smaller channels were like, is that how you do it? And we were like, well, if you do that, we really can't reach you in any way, in any way. And you want us to reach you, unlike the big guys who are like, we've got everything figured out, kind of thing. So anyway,
I will reach out to you and you will give me what I want.
It's so true. It's so true. They're like, I will call down to you from on high, and you will then like throw up a Steam key. Are their DMs open? So if their DMs are open, that usually means that they're open to, receiving private offers or private discussions of like work. Because sometimes I'll have to do, if their DMs aren't open, I'm like, hey, I'll actually just tweet at them. Hey, there's something I wanted to discuss in terms of work. Is there an email address or something I could reach you at? And usually they'll reply, oh yeah, and they'll give it, and they'll give you that information if they think that you're worth their time. And usually you come from a place where they're like, yeah, that's valuable. That developer is worth my time, etc. So, let's see if I just said that, if not, a polite public post to them, adding them on Twitter, for instance, asking if you can have if they have an email or another way to contact them directly about their work and services.
Yep.
And then lastly, even after finding the right person, plan for things to potentially not work out.
Yeah.
Because they very often don't. And what I mean by that is there are many variables at play even after you hire someone that may mean that you'll have to begin your search anew for someone that you just filled the role for. And that sucks. And I hate talking about it because that's something that is just like, it's such a setback in so many ways, but it's something that you have to anticipate for. Especially now, I think, especially in 2022. There's a lot going on. Not working well together is obviously a thing that can happen. The employee or the contractor not delivering on their expectations. Often that stipulation is in almost every single legitimate contract I see, is if one side or the other is not delivering on the expectations that have been set in the contract, then the other side can eliminate the partnership or the agreement. That's like a really common thing I see in contracts. And then the employee contractor quitting out of nowhere, moving on unexpectedly, having health issues, which is, again, not like something that you should be mad about, but it's just something that can happen.
Yeah.
That all that kind of stuff can happen, and you just don't know. Sometimes when you hire people, you're like, they are so solid, and they've said all the right things, and this is going to work out, and they just turn out to be flighty, and they just turn out to be, like they end up leaving really quickly, and it turns out that maybe they it didn't work out for them on their side in terms of the work. They didn't like it. You're muted. TD, you're muted.
Dogs are barking. Like you said, now more than ever, there's always a chance of just the brain fog of a pandemic and how long we've been doing this. If people are just like, nope, I did not have the mental resources that I thought I did.
Yep. Yeah. And go ahead, Bumpy.
No, it happens. I've seen people are like, I'm all for the. I can't. Too many things just weigh on you, and you don't realize it.
And so, yeah, you hope that you're able to, and I'm not saying like, oh, you need to identify these red flag people, but you're hoping to find people that you feel pretty confident that are up to the task, right? Like when you hire them, you hope that you have the eye to be able to kind of tell and stuff. Nothing against the people that don't, but you just, that's a situation you want to try to avoid if you can. And it's certainly not something that you want to put. You don't want to put them through it. Is what I was going to say. Like if they're not going to be able to do it either.
That's fair, but this is something that, again, this is one of those cautionary tales. Like, plan that this is a possibility, don't seek this stuff out. Having these
Yeah,
problems,
not hope for it.
just
Yeah,
have
exactly.
it in your back of your mind that it might happen. So,
and that way you're just not like completely caught off guard. It might be disappointing, but you're not. It might be disappointing still, but you're not gonna be hey doggo. But you're not gonna be completely caught off guard by it, and that's really important. Oh, but that's gonna be that's really important is that you're prepared for it to happen, disappointment or not. It doesn't really matter if you're prepared for it. So you can move on from that disappointment a lot better if you're prepared for it versus you're in the middle of a development cycle to get this game out at a certain point you thought, and then suddenly a really important core team member has had to exit. If you're not thinking about how that might happen, you might cost yourself extra months instead of weeks of time. So it's and that's a really big deal if you say you're in a team situation where people are getting paid monthly. You know what I mean? Like that could be a really big hit on your budget to have that. So I mean that's basically all I wanted to cover about that today. Those were the notes that came to mind when we were talking about this subject, and I don't really have a lot of places to say, hey, you should go to this site or this place, other than just social media in general. And obviously the sites that make the most sense for what you're looking for in terms of, that kind of thing. And then there's also, I didn't mention this before in the diversity thing, but like there are like groups now and social media groups that are like advocates for marginalized groups that you could find. Like, so people that will point you toward, or like social media platform or accounts that will point you to marginalized folks that are looking for work in your space. Yeah. So like definitely seek those out as well if you're interested in that, which again, we really encourage you to be interested in that. Yeah.
Is there anything in particular, Cup, that you would look for if you were to hire someone, say, for Vertigo? Is there a specific, I don't know, the hiring process to me, because I've always been on the other side and always being the person being hired. I've seen a large variety of things go through, and most of it, of course, has been in person. From there was one job that I had, which I did not, I was like, nope, one day, did it, was horrible, hated it, never went back. But like, they kind of just like, all right, here, everybody come do this. Okay, we're going to give it a tryout. And it's just kind of like they like kidnapped you and kind of forced you into the whole thing. And it was,
yeah.
I was like, what in the heck is this? It was terrible.
Yeah,
group interview was a weird thing. I didn't particularly like that, but
no.
I got to do that when I was in my 30s I guess we were competing, but amongst a bunch of basically like 16 to 20-year-olds.
So you're far more prepared.
Yeah. It's shocking how unconfident, insecure, I don't know what the word would be, everybody is when they're that age versus me. I'm like, this is who I am. I flaws and all, I'm here. This is what I'm going to do. And I think that's something that comes with age, experience, everything else. But
sure.
Yeah, just be honest with who you are, I guess would be my, be honest about who you are with, whoever you're actually going out there to try to get a job with.
It's such a balance, right? To be able to tell your employer up front, here are maybe some of my deficiencies, here are my weaknesses, without sounding like I'm a bad worker. Like, you're like, I'm not trying to say I'm a bad worker. I just want to make sure that you understand that like I have certain limitations. Like for me personally, I would bring up my family. Right, like I'm not saying that that's a limitation, but it's something that's important to me that will limit my ability to, be Johnny on the spot all the time, or I can totally just drop everything. And I want to make that clear right away because you got to set boundaries. Again, this is a very tough process where you have to say, if they're not going to even consider my side of this, should I be trying to get this job with them in the first place? You know what I mean? Like, should I be working with this company at all in the first place? And then what your original question was, Bumpy, is like, you can never tell in an interview, like a short interview, whether or not someone is kind of who they are. Yeah. Because that's going to prove out over weeks or months of time most of the time. So that's always like the nerve-wracking part. You're like, this person's hilarious, they're awesome, they're a totally engaging, awesome person.
What are they?
But are they going to flake in like 6 weeks and just not feel the same way about how excited that they are about the job? Now there's a honeymoon phase with jobs as well. We all know this. So after you want to find, I look for people that I'm like, have they worked longer periods of time as opposed to like just quick projects? Like,
Are they
are they going to
committed?
get?
Yeah.
If I need them to go past the honeymoon phase, can I get them to that point? And will they still be providing me value and good work at that point? Is very important as well. I feel like it's really hard to tell in a lot of cases, but you try to base it off of their experience, like and just to see some of their background and what they've been able to do before, and you go, that buoys me to believe that you're going to be able to do this for me because you were able to do this with other people that I see as like legitimate, So let me think. You mentioned other things that when we go into hiring, I had one thought, but I have to think about it for a second. I know we're basically at time here, so I'll try to think about it as we kind of start wrapping up.
Missy said, within the indie space, it might be easier to just be honest about your pros and cons, which I think that's probably true. And as an industry as a whole, there's more conversations about how to be ethical employers, employees, getting to actually say, like Cup said, of like, oh, these are like, tell me about your weaknesses. No, these are my actual weaknesses. I am a human person rather than just I work too hard or whatever. But also things like, I know in programming interviews, there's a lot of conversations about like not making someone do a whiteboard, please program on this sheet in front of me thing anymore, or not getting artists to do essentially free work for you and calling it a job interview kind of thing.
Right.
So being aware of all those conversations that are going on in terms of like, oh, this isn't a best hiring practice. This is not going to show you who people really are. Yeah. And take advantage of people. So
Missy, there's no proof that I'm not part robot. I'm just saying. Ask Cup. He thinks I'm a machine.
Right. Possibly AI. Yeah.
All right. So one thing that I've always hated with interviews, and I get it. It's one of those things. Again, it's even something that you mentioned there is, like they ask you, oh, where do you see yourself in 5 years? How in the world are you ever going to know that? That's 5 years from now. It's, life isn't that simple. But beyond that, what would you say your biggest weaknesses are? It's like, what? It's just it's a weird question. It's one I never fully understood. But stuff for me was always, I do have a hard time when I work with people who are not hard workers. I don't quite get to their level, but I am definitely less productive. Whereas if I paired with somebody who is a hard worker, super production just comes out and we're flying through.
Yeah, I think it's antiquated to say like, what are your weaknesses? Like, I think it's just like, hey, do you have any struggles day to day that we might want to address, or that we'd be able to help you with? That if it's like when I first got my office job and like when I was 22, 23, I went through like all sorts of different anxieties with that I didn't even know about or think about at the time. That I look back on and I'm like, man, if I could have even talked about any of that kind of stuff, that would have helped me dramatically in terms of dealing with it. And so to just like let someone know, hey, on a personal level, like we're all like really advocates of like mental health here, and if you feel that there's anything we can do to help you out in the process, even if it's like down the line, if you're like feeling burnt out, please communicate that with us and stuff, just to let them know kind of where you're coming from, and how you value that for yourself and for your company and people that work for you and such. That can really put them in a really like good space, because then they'll actually open up and talk to you, because they can kind of trust you, because you don't sound like one of those crazy people that doesn't admit that things exist, like mental health issues and stuff.
I know for me, interviewing for the Indie Bros, talking to Ryabi, and he mentioned he has ADHD. I'm like, oh, good. So you'll understand that, like, if I haven't done something, just remind me. I've forgotten it exists. Like,
yeah. And I think that he's really proud of him being in his position that he is, and can say, I have ADHD, like loud and proud, and I'm an owner of a company. It points to the fact that, like, there's no issue here. Like, there's no issue in that ability for him to do that, and then like people can see that who have ADHD and can be really hopefully like inspired by that, and say, oh, cool. Like that means I can, because I think that would be a thing, right? You would think some people would think, well, if I have this mental health issue, then I really can't go for my biggest goals. Or maybe I couldn't manage a company, or I couldn't own a company and stuff like that. And it's like, no, that's not the case at all. But Ryabi knows his deficiencies, or where he'll struggle, and he gets the rest of the people that work with Indie Bros to sort of benefit or fill those gaps and benefit him and put him in a position.
Everybody up for success. Let's not pretend we're all robots, like we were saying. Right. Of like, there's ways we can help each other, which is always fantastic.
Yeah, it's nice to work for a company that understands that next level of how we are. And unfortunately, that's not the case at the AAA in a lot of areas. I still read things about game testers and QA, and it's just really disappointing and depressing. And so someone's got to be better. So it's nice that the indie side is pushing to be better. Not that I'm trying to toot our horn or anything, because we have plenty of things wrong. Every bit of industry has things wrong with them. They're still trying to get better with. So, but at least it exists in the space a little bit more, that people understand that you're a human, that you have a life outside of your job, and that you'd like to have energy for that too, as well. That's really important thing that I think a lot of people don't keep in mind with a lot of different jobs. So you'll get happier work, just as an employer, by the way, you'll get happier employees that will want to work harder for you for longer periods of time if you do this.
That's 100% what I was going to say. We're starting to understand that having whole, complete, fulfilled humans as employees gets better results than a bunch of burned out, waiting for the chance to quit. I hate everything about this job, humans.
Yep. I mean, you just don't want exactly. You don't want an environment where people don't want to be there. That's not going to be conducive to getting anything productive done or value for your company.
Yep, it's all very true. To wrap us up. There we go. I can say words. Missy points out that my neck injury is probably proof that I'm human. That's fair. And she is like-minded in that the people, depending on how hard the people at the top works in a company, also is a big motivation for how hard she would work. She said, I felt seen by my manager when he noticed I became a bit burnt out before, noticed it. I was still trying not to accept it in yourself. Yeah. And it's always nice to have someone who's, they're looking out for you. Be like, are you okay with this? And you're like, yeah, I can get through this. But then I'm just going to kind of crash for a little bit. Or, oh, yeah, you know what? I am overreaching.
Absolute guardian angel.
Yeah.
That boss is absolute guardian angel. Yeah. If you have people like that in your life, that's a great thing for sure. That will tell you before you even realize it yourself. So that's the great. No.
Oh, sorry. Just for next week, Cup says that he doesn't like you guys anymore. No, I'm kidding. Cup is going to be, is it traveling with your family? Is that what it was?
Be a ski trip. Yep.
Ski trip. He's going to be on vacation, trying to pull a hamstring like our buddy did.
Hopefully not. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And not crashing down a mountain because he's going too fast. So he's going to be on a ski trip. We're going to be off that week, and then we'll be coming back. And we're going to do some fun Steam store page reviews again. It looks like a Tiny Disaster's lining those up for us. Or we'll start doing that.
We'll be posting about it tonight on our Twitter, and then
your dog looks very
hear about it a lot over the next little while.
Great for me to leave for a week. A little extra time for you to get this all together. Perfect on me to do that. And your dog's adorable. Yep, yes. Totally adorbs.
Dog is very comfortable on the chair. I like it.
Oh, yeah.
Cup is human. No, he's not human. He's definitely an alien or some sort of beast man or something. I'm not sure. Anyway, folks, I think that's going to do it. I want to thank you all for stopping by, as Missy says, and I will repeat the sentiment. Enjoy your ski trip. Have some fun. Again, try not to get hurt, or
thanks, Missy.
Have your family get hurt if they're trying. Are your kids skiing too, or is it just you?
Everyone's learning but me for the first time, and I got private lessons for them basically as soon as they hit the snow. So yeah,
nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then I suppose we will see you guys not next week, but the week after. I actually might be here next week, about 2 hours earlier than normal. So at 12 p.m. Eastern, I'll probably be showcasing a game that we have worked with at some point. So for about an hour, I'll be doing that. And then that'll usually lead into, whatever our discussion is going to be later on during the day. So hopefully I'll see you guys there for that. But otherwise, I'll see you in 2 weeks. So any final thoughts, folks?
Nope. Have a good one.
All right. I'll see you guys later.